I first learned of God in Sunday school, a He who loved me. I learned to capitalize the G for God, the H for He, my mom holding my hand as I wrote, guiding my words along the page, shepherding my every move. On Sundays, when she took me with her to church, I looked at the cross before us, but mainly I looked at the mother beside me, secure, constant, steadfast. I searched her for answers, my own capital H, the one before me to button my blouse, hold me close, steady my cursive hand. She was my constant, my ever reliable. God, capital G, serving as the third wheel to mother-daughter, that which I already called complete. In writing, third person is defined as that of an outsider looking in on the story unfolding, however highly capitalized. I didn't need God like I needed her. Soon, church became challenging for her, when her headscarves replaced winter hats, when the chemo deemed her too weak to stand. Soon, I could no longer reach for her hand, seeing as she needed both to sturdy her stance. When she was gone, all that remained, a rosary that dangled delicately in my hands, the ashes of her flowers beaded together with the cross, a masterpiece meeting of her and of him, capital H. I clung to it, determined to find her, to feel her embrace, her comfort. But more strongly, I found him. That is, God. I found you. You, capital Y. In writing, words spoken outright to a recipient defined not as second person, but as direct address. Direct address to my God, your hand now cleaved to mine, your embrace nearer now than ever before because of the void that remained. A space of heartbreak and despair now turned opportunity, a space for which you to enter. Put your hand on mine, call me yours. A bond infinitely unbreakable. In the emptiness, you met me, God, not as a distant third-person outsider looking in, but as an insider working within, in it, through it, before it. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I had pined for a faraway God with shouts so loud I couldn't hear you next to me all along. Your words, shout if you'd like, but I'm already here. Addressing the He alone no longer sufficed in the hollowness. This was a job for a you God, a relationship rife with the intimacy and urgency only you, my here God, can provide. I drop the He. I drop to my knees. You, God, are my God. You knit me together in my mother's womb.
Man of sorrows, Lamb of God, by His own betrayed. salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. Sent of heaven, God's own Son, to purchase and redeem and reconcile the very ones who nailed him to the tree. Oh, that rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. Now my debt is paid, it is paid in full by the precious blood that my Jesus spilled. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. Now my debt is paid, it is paid in full by the precious blood that my Jesus spilled. Now the curse of sin has no hold on me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. Oh, the rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. See, the stone is rolled away. Behold the empty tomb. Hallelujah, God be praised. He's risen from the grave. Oh, the rugged cross, my salvation, where your love poured out over me. Now my soul cries out, hallelujah, praise and honor unto thee. Praise and honor unto thee.
Christ is my reward and all of my devotion. Now there's nothing in this world that could ever satisfy. Through every trial, my soul will sing, no turning back. I've been set free. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for sing, Jesus is here. To God be the glory. Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. You're everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. The cross before me, the world behind me. No turning back. No turning back. Oh, Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. You're everything I need. Oh, Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. I have decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. No turning back. No turning back. No turning back.
Grief is an interesting word. It's one of those, it's really hard to define unless you've experienced it yourself. And if you have, you know the complex range of emotions that are wrapped up inside of it. I mean, at the same time, grief is despair. It's pain, mixed with this profound understanding that this is not the way that something should be. It should not have played out like this. Even if you don't know what this is, you know that it's not supposed to be like this. It's anger, and yet you're not mad. It feels like emptiness, just hoping for something to make it right. In an odd way, grief is this strange combination of sorrow and longing. And this surreal experience earlier this year was right at the height of the COVID-19 uncertainty, when everyone was asking questions about, what does this mean? How do we interact with other people? How does this spread? And there was just this fear of being around other people at all. And I found myself at a funeral. And there I was, being one of the few invited into this very intimate moment for this family. And I'll never forget standing with the widow and crying with her, praying with her, and yet not being able to do the one thing that felt like the most natural thing in the world to do, to just put my arm around her and hug her. And it's hard to put into words all of what I experienced in that moment, right? It's that strange combination of sorrow for everything that she was feeling, pain for what the family was going to be going through in the next couple months, and anger at this, what seemed like this cruel, isolating irony of the pandemic. And I found myself asking the question, what do I do now? What do I do next? How do I help this family move on from this sorrow and pain? How do I, as their pastor, help them take the next step? What do I do now? In the summer that followed, in this spring, winter, was marked by shootings and marches and protests and riots. I mean, there were all of these articles and videos that just kind of swamped and swarmed through social media on your news feed. You saw these things on your phone. Violence. We watched death on a smartphone. I mean, think about that for a moment. You're looking at what is a sacred moment, the last few moments of somebody's life, and yet this has just been exposed for everybody to see. Anybody who wanted to. And there it was again, this strange combination of emotions that everybody was feeling, this sense of sorrow and despair, of I can't believe we're seeing these things happen. I can't believe what's happening in our country right now. There was this sense at the same time that this must not happen again. Like we can't keep going on the way that things are. This question, a familiar one, came back for all of us. What now? What do we do next to make sure that doesn't happen again? What is our response individually, collectively? What now? And yet that might be the question that has marked the entire year for everyone. What do we do now? And this year has been defined by the word loss. Right, in every sense of the word. Loss of community as we've had friends move away. Loss of loved ones as some of them have passed away. It's been a loss of stability in all kinds of levels. There's a new normal for everything that we once were okay with. Family, school, home, job, relationships. They're all finding a new right side up. I think the word that describes this is grief. It's not as if, the pandemic started hardship for everybody. Some of us have been in it for years, and the last one has just been the icing on the cake. But I think if we take time just to reflect on everything that we've been through just in a year, all of the complex emotions and things that we've experienced, the word that sums it up perfectly is grief. And so collectively, we're asking this question, what do we do now? What do we do next? What is our response? But what if we're asking the wrong questions? What if grief doesn't need a response? What if grief is the response? In the Old Testament, the people of Israel seemed to pick up on this idea. They seemed to understand that grief is something more than just a reaction that produces something inside of us, that it is in itself a kind of response, something that we should not just move on and away from. The Book of Lamentations in the Old Testament is one of these often forgotten little books in the Old Testament, sandwiched right between these major tomes, the book of Jeremiah, the book of Ezekiel, and it's really not hard to see why so many of us can skip right over Lamentations. I mean, at a first read, it's not a very uplifting book, at least it doesn't seem to be. It's trying to capture the experience of someone living through the destruction of Jerusalem. Right, this is the thing that the prophets had been warning about for generations, and yet very few God's people had actually taken this seriously. Lamentations is a book of anguish as people are confronted with their own failure to live the way that God has created them to live. They're confronted with their frailty. They are face to face with their sin and the consequences of it. And so it doesn't seem like a book that we would quickly run to. The author says this in chapter 3. He says, "I am a man who has seen affliction. Under the rod of his wrath, he has driven me and brought me into darkness without any light. Surely against me he turns his hand again and again the whole day long." And these are harsh words. They are. But they're articulating the reality that this is what our failure as humans looks like before a perfect and holy and majestic God. That what the Bible calls sin, we experience as brokenness. That there is judgment for our failure to live the way that God has created us to live. There's judgment for our failure to do the things that God has called us to do. And the author goes on to say this: "He's made my teeth grind on gravel, and made me to cower in ashes. My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. And so I say, my endurance has perished. So has my hope from the Lord." And if that isn't grief, I don't know what is. I wonder how many of us can actually resonate with those words from the author of Lamentations. When how many of us have been in this space where it feels like happiness has left us? That's what grief produces. This sense of being lost, this sense of being empty. I mean, this is the anguish of depression and emptiness. My endurance has perished, and so has my hope from the Lord. So I think grief forces us to ask a question: where do we go from here? What do we do next? Because none of us want to sit in this place of despair and sorrow. How do we move on from this? Yet I can't help but think that maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe we're not supposed to quickly turn the page and go on to something else. You think about it, the world has almost programmed us to want to change the channel anytime we run into conflict or hardship and just move on to something else, to pretend like we're not in the bad place that we may actually be, to pretend like we're not feeling what's actually going on in our own heart. And yet the scriptures have a very different way forward for us. See, this is the beautiful thing about the Book of Lamentations, is that it creates space for us to have a genuine response to pain and sorrow and hardship and heartache, and that response is grief. And in that grief, there is a spectacular space created for us to worship, to encounter the living God who is himself a man of sorrows, one who is well acquainted with grief, one who has taken on our brokenness, taken on our sin and our shame, and bore those things to the cross, taking all of what we had deserved and our failure to live the way that God has created us to live. This is the beautiful thing about Lamentations. This is what it means to lament. It means that we worship through grief. Not that we just move on from it to the next thing. We worship through grief. And this isn't something that we naturally know how to do. It isn't something that's easy for us to just move on to the next thing. And yet you see this idea so clearly played out in the words of Lamentations. Because in talking about his grief, talking about anguish and sorrow, he says this, "Remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope, that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It's good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." I think on Ash Wednesday, this is what we truly consider. Ash Wednesday marks the start of the Lenten season, where we begin a journey that followers of Jesus have taken for centuries, to go on and think and sit in the midst of grief, choosing not to just turn the page, not to go on to something else, but to encounter God in the midst of our grief and see a God who is with us in our grief. Friends, Ash Wednesday reminds us that we don't need to pretend that everything is okay. We don't need to pretend that there is no pain, there is no sorrow, or that there's nothing to mourn at all. But remembering and reflecting on the fact that God promises to be with us in our grief, that he is with us in our pain, and does not call us to pretend that it doesn't exist. The way that we have typically gone through this journey of Lent is through the practice of taking on ashes and putting them on our heads. And what this means for us is this tangible symbol that we are not going to just try and turn the leaf, but we will sit in grief as the book of Lamentations invites us to. It invites us to worship through our grief. And the ashes are a symbol to us of the grief that we have experienced, and that we want to encounter God in the midst of our grief. And so we take these ashes and remind us of our brokenness, our frailty, our humanity, and we put them on our heads as a symbol. It reminds us that from dust we have come, to dust we shall return. It's a tangible picture of the grief that we choose to acknowledge, to recognize, and refuse to simply move past, an invitation to worship through our grief. And yet, friends, the good news of the gospel is that grief is not an end in and of itself. That our grief makes way for one day all the things that we grieve to be restored in Christ. That's the funny thing about grief, that complex tapestry of emotions, of despair and longing and emptiness and hope. You see, because of the gospel, we know that we do not have to grieve without hope. There is an end to the point where we long for things to be made right, because we look forward to the day, as Jesus says, when there will be no more tears, no more mourning, no more sorrow. We look forward to the day when he makes all things right and all things new. You see, this journey we move through in the Easter season of Lent finds as its culmination the celebration of Jesus from the dead. His resurrection reminds us that we too, by faith in him, experience new life and life to the full. So that even in our grief, even in our sorrow, we look forward to a day where all things will be made new. And that we can say, along with the author of Lamentations, that this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. In whatever season we find ourselves, whatever kind of grief we may be experiencing now, we call to mind that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, and his mercies are new every morning. Great is His faithfulness.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God, my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. I could not love thee, so blind and unfeeling. Covenant promises fell not to me. Then without warning, desire or deserving, I found my treasure, my pleasure in thee. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. And all I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. I have no merit to woo or delight thee. I have no wisdom or powers to employ. Yet in thy mercy, how pleasing thou find'st me. This is thy pleasure, that thou art my joy. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. And all I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth. Thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide. Strength for today and bright hope for tomorrow. Blessings all
searched the world, but it couldn't fill me. Man's empty praise, treasures that fade are never enough. And you came along and put me back together, and every desire is now satisfied here in your love. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. I'm not afraid to show you my weakness, my failures and flaws. Lord, you've seen them all, and you still call me friend. 'Cause the God of the mountain is the God of the valley, and there's not a place your mercy and grace won't find me again. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. Oh, there's nothing better than you. There's nothing better than you. There's nothing, nothing is better than you. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn mourning to dancing. You give beauty for ashes. You turn shame into glory. You're the only one who can. You turn graves into God.